So now we're going to start a roundtable. Thank you all for being here. Hopefully next year we're going to be everybody here in Moscow, and we can start this conference with hacks and have maybe coffee breaks and so on. For now, we have to be happy to be here and to share with you all these new ideas that we have in this roundtable. This session is called International and Comparative Studies of Quality of Education. With me here in the panel is Joanna, Robert. Okay, let's say it like that. Joanna from the University of Technology, Poland. Robert from the Universidade Federal da Bahia, Brazil. And Jake Merdock from University of Burgundie, France. So I welcome you all. Thank you for being here. And I would say let's start to hear your papers and your new ideas. So first, I'm going to present Joanna. The study, it's called Quality of Non-Academic Staff and its Impact on the Performance and Exploration of European and US Universities. And this study, as Joanna and her team wrote in the presentation, it's a study that considers, as I understand, quality of non-academic staff as an observed factor and estimates in non-parametrically. So as you would say, you think you can shed new light on this relevant topic, analyzing European universities, as I understand. So Joanna, the floor is yours.
Okay, hello. So I'm Joanna Wольszak-Dерлac from Gdańsk University of Technology. Mагдалена, thank you. I thought probably I was recruited to present this paper because my surname sounds more Eastern European than the last two. But so Mагдалена, you shouldn't have problems to pronounce it. Anyway, I will try to share the screen. Okay, can I share the screen?
Yes, you can. Yes, you can.
Okay, where is my presentation? But what you can see, can you see? No, you can stop. Once again, I want to share the presentation.
Just share it. I mean,
yes. Sorry, but when I open,
you have the authorization.
Oh, sorry, because I just by mistake I closed my presentation, and now I will try to share the screen. It's always the okay. Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay, I will try to. Okay, maybe now better. Can you see the bigger?
Everything is okay.
Okay. So this is I have like 15 minutes. I will try to be as specific as I can. Yeah. So this is a co-work with Cincja Daraiо and Alessandra Avενeli from Sapienza University in Rome. Okay, and this is in fact, oh, Cincja, hello. Do you want to present? Okay.
Hi, please go on. Please.
Okay. But if there are any questions, I will direct them to you. Okay. I'm very good, in the part. Okay, never mind. Sorry for this. Okay, that's why this is a work in progress. So if you have any questions, they are more than welcome. Okay, and in fact, I have some questions to you that we would like to have the feedback on our work. So what is the agenda of this presentation? So motivation, literature review, methodology, and estimation, data, and discussion. So first of all, what is the motivation of our study? We all know that the key factors determining the success of any organization is staff. And in higher education institutions, we have two main groups, academic and non-academic staff. While the role of academic staff for university performance is clear, teaching, conducting research, performing knowledge transfer activities, so-called field mission, the contribution of academic staff still is more vague. At the same time, the role and the importance of non-academic staff increases. They do not only support academicians, but sometimes, as it is even criticized in the literature, their role is so big that they start to settle the rules and defining the priorities of academic life. Yes, here this is a famous book by Greensberg. Then Martin indicates a growth in bureaucratic procedures, and as a result, a disproportionate increase in the number of employees in administration. Surprisingly, despite the growth in administrative staff observed across higher education institutions, academicians spend more and more time on non-academic staff, more and more time on non-academic duties. And here you see the reference to Kwiek, 2019, quite nice research based on the questionnaire. So they send the questionnaire to academic staff and ask them, what is the percentage, what you are doing, in fact, in your day? Yes, and they should answer, what is the percentage of your day? Although I work in night, so never mind. So what is your percentage you spend on research, on teaching and administration? So surprisingly, academician, either the percentage of non-academic staff is increasing, academicians still have to perform non-academic staff duties, and it is even not decreasing the time they spend on the administration duties. So in the literature review, the studies are mainly dedicated to the role of academic staff, as I already said. Non-academic staff are even identified by what they do not do. They do not teach, do not do research, and the available quantitative data is quite limited, especially as far as Europe is concerned, and simply shows the size of the overall non-academic staff. Non-academic staff encloses many different skills and roles. Okay, we can have technicians and top managers. You know, in the US, you have provost, yes, the most important person at the university. And so there are some studies showing the evolution of general staff. So sometimes we don't call them non-academic staff, but we try to call them professional staff, general staff, etc. There are some other studies analyzes possible relationship between university board characteristics and university through quantitative data related to the American universities. Other Cunningham here shows the faculty participation in academic decision is correlated with higher performance when it only concerns with faculty, personnel, and student matters. So as you can see, there are the interest in the role of non-academic staff is increasing. Yes, but still the data we have is quite limited. So what is the objective of our study? So first of all, we want to analyze the cross-country variation in the composition of the non-academic staff, to assess the impact of the volume of non-academic staff on the performance of European university. And how we measure the volume, I will explain in a second. It's simply the percentage of non-academic staff in total staff. It is the volume of non-academic staff. But then we start to be interested and we want to measure the quality of non-academic staff. And this is the methodology that concerns the quality. It will be the latent quality variable as the unobserved factor. Yes, I will explain in a second. And our is to assess the impact of the estimated quality of non-academic staff on the performance of European university. Okay, in the title we have US, but that's why it will be our question whether we can enrich the the analysis to the US, but there is always the discussion whether we should compare, you know, oranges to apples, whether we can compare US to Europe. So the last slides will be connected with the US academia. So what is the methodology? So we have the production process of the university. So this is taken from a work of Cinzia. So I like this slide very much. So sorry, Cinzia, I always show it. Yes, not as a logo, not as the product placement, but I really like, and it is simple but very complicated. In fact, what we have in the academia, we have inputs, yes, some resources, financial resources, academic stuff, non-academic stuff. We have production process, like in a, you know, in the factory, although, you know, in the academia, when I say production process, they are going to kill me. Yes, we are not the factory, but at the end we have the outputs. Yes, so what are the outputs of the process, of the production process at the higher education institution? Of course, you know, papers or research done by the academic staff, graduates, the students, yes, and some other, for example, connected to patents, you know, with the sharing the knowledge to the society. And in fact, in all these stages, we could have the quality factor. So if we talk about the input, we could have the unobserved quality factor, because if we have, you know, two universities with the same number of academic or non-academic staff, of course, there is unobserved quality factors, because, you know, staff from one university, the human capital can be different than from another. Then can be observed quality factor in the production process. There can be some, you know, new technology in some of the universities that, in fact, they produce more or less. And then we have an observed quality factor as far as outputs are considered. Let's consider, you know, graduation ratio and graduates. If we have two universities, we have Gdańsk University of Technology. Yes. Sorry, because I have started the alarm clock to know what is the time. Sorry, I have to tune my phone. Okay, so the different quality of the outputs, if you look just at the numbers, so at the Gdańsk University of Technology, you have a certain number of the graduates. If, for example, at University of Berkeley, you have the same number of graduates, it doesn't mean that they are of the same quality. How to, you know, how to measure maybe the different quality of the graduates? Usually it is measured by the labor market. Okay, if you get higher wage, if you graduate from the Berkeley, of course, you know, probably your quality as the graduates is bigger. Never mind. Okay, so this is this production function. And then the quality of non-academic staff may be an unobserved latent factor of production and may affect the performance of the university. So again, we are following the methodology of Daraiо. And on the left-hand side, what we have? Inputs, X. On the right-hand side, we have W, auxiliary variable, correlated with input, but independent of this latent variable. So this latent variable, LQ, it will be latent quality. So this is something that we cannot observe, this quality. And our task, or Cinzia task, in fact, is how to get from empirical data the measure of the quality. Okay, so the idea, this is this whole different equation. I'm not going to discuss it, but just in one word, we treat this quality as the residual. So we know what are the inputs. Okay, we choose this W as an auxiliary variable, and based on this, what will be left from this function, we are going to treat as the quality. Okay, I will not go into the details of this methodology. Yes, but then data. So we have data about the European universities taken from the European Tertiary Education Register. So this is the open access data base, and we have data about at the individual level of universities, covering, as you can see, many universities from many countries, 2011, 2016, although there is some, for example, for France, there is data for 2017. Then we merge it with the data from the University of Leiden about the bibliometric indicators, yes, publications. Then we merge with the data on participation of institutions in European framework programs. So we know in how many programs a given university takes place. Then we merge it also with the European regional database, characteristic of a NUTS2 region when the institution is located, because there's a whole discussion, yes, whether, you know, what is good region is good for the university or university is good for the region, never mind. So we restrict the data to the university with complete information of our main variables for the years 2011, 2016. Here you see the full sample of our panel composition of the number of university by country. This is the full, we want to have the panel, meaning that we want to have observed a given university in all years. And still, here you see more universities that we take to the final sample. Why? Because still we have some missing observation, for example, for some of the universities. So at the end, here you have a lower number of countries. And here some key statistics on higher education, mean values by country. For Austria, for example, number of students per academic staff, and so on and so on, okay? And then here you see the share of non-academic staff to total staff in full-time equivalence across countries or years. The other problem is that some countries, they report in full-time equivalence, the staff, but others in headcounts. Here, as far as I remember, we took full-time equivalence. Nowadays, we have a way to, in fact, to calculate from the headcounts, to go from the headcounts to full-time equivalence. Anyway, here, just full-time equivalence. So based on this data that we have, as you can see in Cyprus, there's a biggest share of non-academic staff in total staff based on the data we have. The lowest is in Switzerland. Of course, it also depends on the definition of non-academic staff. Yes, and for big countries, when you have more university, of course, the dispersion is bigger. Then what we are doing, second stage regression to assess the impact of the volume of the non-academic staff on the performance. So we have inputs, we have outputs, as in this graph. We have external factor of the performance model, and we conduct conditional data in the development analysis output orientated. So output orientated, meaning that we want to maximize output with a given input. So what we have just here, 3 inputs: total current revenues, total academic staff, and number of non-academic staff. Output: total graduates, total number of publication. Then what is important, we have external factor, percentage of non-academic staff. Yes, and as you can see here, there is a graph showing the ratio of conditional efficiency to unconditional efficiency, meaning that on the horizontal line, you have value of Z. Z, this is the share of non-academic staff to total staff. And if this ratio is constant, it means that it does not depend whether you take this Z into account or not. Quite flat, but with some, I would say, outliers. So maybe this volume of non-academic staff, so the share of non-academic staff to total staff, maybe it's not important for the measure of the productivity or efficiency. I don't want to mix. Cinzia can correct me, okay? But I'm running to the next point. So what is the procedure? First of all, we have to find this W, this auxiliary variable, and we think that it could be the good proxy would be the size. But how to measure the size of the university? As you can see here, for example, 8 variables that can describe the size of the university. So we have principal component analysis in order to have instead of these 8 guys, to have just 1. So here some statistics connected with these 8 variables to show what is the percentage of our final component analysis is due to these 8 guys. Okay, so estimation of latent variables. So this is the most important part. So this is the estimation of the quality. So we estimated the latent quality variable. So this proxy of the quality of non-academic staff. And here you see the partial correlation between this latent quality variable and some bibliometric variables. So we treat this quality, we estimated this quality of non-academic staff, and then there's a simple correlation between some bibliometric variables. As you can see here, negatively correlated with proportion of publication co-authored by a company, negatively correlated with proportion of publication in which at least 2 countries are involved. Here, some positive, but maybe not statistically significant. So maybe the quality, of staff, maybe it's not, productive in the academia. And here are some graphs, quality versus students per academic staff. So again, on the horizontal line, you have this quality estimated as the quality of the academic staff. Here on the vertical, you have the students per academic staff. So question, whether this quality, whether the number of students per academic staff is depending on the quality of non-academic staff. Then you have quality again, and here the participation in EU FP framework programs. Our idea was that if there's a university with higher number of the EU FP participation program, they should have not only more staff, in administration, but better staff, okay, to take care, to help to run those programs. But here, you know, flat rather. Then second stage regression to assess the impact of this quality variable on the performance. So we again come back to the first stage, meaning that we conduct this production function analysis, input, outputs, and external factor. But as you can see here, we have the same input, output, but we treat the estimated latent quality variable as our external factor. And we want to check whether it impacts performance or not. And as you can see here on the horizontal line, quality estimated, and here on the vertical line, the ratio of conditional efficiency to unconditional efficiency. If it will be stable, as you remember in the volume, it means that there is no difference whether we take into account this variable. Yes, and here it's quite important that we take into account the value of this latent variable in the so it means that it is maybe it is important for the efficiency. Okay, discussion, problems and possible explanation. Maybe I will drop it because I'm running out of time. Here, possible explanation for the analysis for the US. It's nice with the US that we have more detailed data considering non-academic staff and academic staff. For example, we have the more detailed categories of the employment. We have data about instructional staff, research, public service. We have data about those guys from the administration, but librarian, management, and so on. As you can see here, we have also information whether they work full-time, part-time, whether they are with or without faculty status, because you can have a dean, which at the same time is the faculty member, okay? In the Europe, we don't know it. Yes, whether they are on tenure or not tenure, multi-year, annual, less than annual contract, and so on. Some observation from descriptive statistics for the US. As you can see here, this is the share of non-academic staff to total staff is around 60%. This is based on full-time, and this is on the part-time. This is managers as the share of non-academic staff, around 40%. And then this is the office and administrative support as the percentage of non-academic staff, around 24%. But the last slide, non-academic staff total versus publication to academic staff. So on the horizontal line, this is for the US. We have non-academic staff as the share of the total staff, but this is the total. So without divided into part-time, full-time, and this is publication per academic. Something like positive correlation, yes. Here you see the non-academic staff to total staff, but just full-time. Again, maybe different story. This is part-time. So again, this is about the US. So as you can see, if we consider non-academic staff to total staff, but we take into account only part-time guys who work part-time, maybe there is no positive correlation with publication per academics. And the final slide, coming back to Europe. So on the left-hand side, you have Europe. You have non-academic staff in total staff expressed in full-time equivalents, and on the vertical line, you have publication per academic staff. So as you can see here, those, is there any relationship? Question mark. And for the US, it was already presented. You have non-academic staff to total staff expressed in full-time equivalents, and again, publication per academic staff expressed only, we take those guys in full-time equivalents, something like positive correlation. So maybe the story about the impact of quality, you know, of the non-academic staff is different in Europe and different in US. In fact, without conclusion at that moment, because it is a round table. So in fact, if you have any comments, please. Okay, I'm talking too much. It's 20 minutes. Yes, so I stop now.
It's okay. It's okay. We're on time. Thank you very much. Super interesting. You would have said that the US should be more efficient, taking into account history and the way that you have practical and more European way of thinking. You would say that the US should be more efficient in universities than Europe.
Maybe Cinzia want to answer, but just my quick answer. In fact, you know, we haven't checked it yet. Yes, we because this, you know, proper analysis of this calculating latent quality variable considers only Europe. But there are some signs, you know, with the simple, you know, with the partial productivity, because publication per academic, it can be treated only as a partial productivity. There are some signs that maybe, Magdalena, you are right, that maybe US is more efficient, but we still don't know. It's like the, you know, motivation to take into account only US,
Yes,
also US.
Yes,
Cinzia.
if I may add, in fact, this is just a descriptive analysis. The final plot was just a descriptive analysis. Of course, it could be interesting to see what is the situation for Russian universities, given that we are in a Russian universities. But it was really interesting also to go inside into the US data, because there, for instance, we have the information in one of the last slides that Joanna was presenting about the percentage of managers, the different categories of staff. And so it will be interesting in our next analysis to see if overall, if we do not distinguish between the role that they have, the kind of non-academic staff, if we go into deeper classification of the non-academic staff, maybe we can see if there is how the results will be. But this is a work in progress that we would like to
Cinzia, sorry for interrupting, but because still now we don't have Russia in our, but in Ether there is Russia, yes? Is it no?
No, unfortunately no.
Okay,
but
so you can link with Magdalena.
Yes. This could
so
be
you
an
can
extension.
link with Magdalena, and then you will work for a new Horizon 22 to
you
get.
You said it's an ongoing, so it's okay. There's time. You know, Robert has a question, and maybe, and then we can also give Jake time for a question. We have like 3 more minutes. Robert, your question? Robert?
Yes, hello. Thank you very much for your talk. It was very, very interesting. My question is this, in dealing with the United States and internationally, did you take into account the number of students who are part of the non-academic staff? In some countries, students are not part of the non-academic staff, but in the United States, a lot of the non-academic work is done by students. It's a form of getting money for paying for their education. So I'm wondering if you took into account the difference between academic, or rather non-academic staff that are not students versus academic staff, non-academic staff that are students.
Okay, so just quick answer that at the moment, in fact, in the US, we take the data from the official data, and students which are employed, they are taking as the non-academic staff, and there was even the slide showing graduate assistants. Okay, so they are taken as a non-academic staff, and in fact, yes, you are right. In Europe, students, this is according to the definition in Ether, usually in Europe, they are not considering as the non-academic staff. But at the moment in the US, and it would be very interesting also to see the difference, you know, if we have non-academic staff with students and without students. In Europe, we are going to have problems to have such an information, as far as I know the Ether database. But in the US, we could have such information, and we have, but we, at the moment, we took all the, you know, all the categories as a non-academic staff.
But thank you very much, because this could be interesting to do comparison. So we have to take this out to compare US and in Europe, because we have less in Europe. So thank you very much. We keep note of this. Yes.
Yeah. The involvement of students might be a positive factor.
Yeah, this could be
also especially PhD students. Yes, PhD students. Yes, we have data about PhD students, but part of them are employed.
Sorry, just to give the schedule. Jake, your question?
Yes, I was listening to your theoretical model. It reminded me of the previous work of Eric Hanushek, and particularly in terms of processes, input, process, output. And there have been many studies in the United States looking at why within the process, despite having all the ingredients of higher education, this is work by the National Bureau of Educational Research, that universities, there's like some sort of efficiency And also, for example, the example in this paper I've read is like to play a quatuor, it takes 4 people. You can't have productivity gains on certain types of activities, and notably in academic or university settings. And so maybe it's to treat how, because you have some sort of, in your estimates, there are latent, unknown, explained, unobserved variants. And so there may be something also, particularly also in each country's context. Like, for example, in France, according to status of people are civil servants, how their careers are modulated, and to what degree people have, especially non-academic staff, have the freedom to be innovative, or just have to follow the rules, follow the rule, what the boss tells them, and etc.
Jake, thank you for this comment. In fact, in our work, we take into account, this heterogeneity across countries by fixed effects and adding some other variables describing. Here, it was just very simple, but thank you for this comment. We should take this into account. Thank you very much.
Joanna, Cynthia, thank you very much. Maybe afterwards we're going to have more questions. I would like to give the mic to Robert Vergine from Universidade Federal da Bahia. His study is a comparative analysis of university quality assurance in Brazil and the United States. Robert, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you very much, Mагдалена. You mentioned the talk should last between 15 and 20 minutes. I'll be closer to 20, so when we get to 18, let me know, and I'll bring it to a close, no matter where I am. It's a pleasure to be here with the other members of the panel as well. I participated in the same event 7 years ago, and it's a pleasure to be back, though then I had to go to Moscow. Now I don't have to go to Moscow. I'm in Brazil. I'm a professor in Brazil. I've been in Brazil for 45 years, but as you may have gathered from my accent, I'm from the United States. And so it's natural that I am comparing quality assurance in Brazil with quality assurance in the United States. I'm a senior fellow at the Lehman Center in Stanford University. So the United States part of this talk is based on research I did while at Stanford University. As you know, quality assurance has become a big issue, especially since the 1990s, concern about the quality of higher education institutions on a national scale, guaranteeing minimum quality among all institutions within a given country. You have several factors that are contributing to this concern that really begins in the 1990s. It existed before in a few countries, but really as a national movement or as an international movement, you find the quality assurance concern as something within the last 30 years. And you've got the combination of higher education massification, differentiations in terms of institutions, in terms of students. You have the rise of the private sector that creates special concerns in some countries. You have rising costs and thus demands for accountability in terms of the utilization of funds. You have the tendency for globalization, which creates transnational communications and mobility, and this creates a concern with regard to equivalency between countries in terms of quality. And of course, you need information for both students and for university authorities. You need information for them to make key decisions as to where they're going to study and how you're going to attract students to study at your particular institution. As I said, these models were developed mainly in Europe, but also this extended throughout the world in the 1990s. And you basically find there's a common denominator. There's sort of a common model, and the model's based in part on experience developed by the United States way before. The United States begins its process in the 19th century. But you have the idea of visits to institutions made by peers as opposed to evaluation experts, but rather academic peers. You have an emphasis on internal evaluation as a counterpoint or as a point of departure for the external visits. And you have a final decision, which is basically a yes/no decision. Does the institution have a minimum quality level, or does it not have a minimum quality level? And so these are common factors. It's been recognized in the literature as kind of a general model of quality assurance. But obviously there are huge differences between countries based on historical background, based on the structure and organization of the country. And so it's interesting to compare. And that's why I find it interesting to compare the United States and Brazil, not just because of my involvement in these two countries, but because they represent different approaches to higher education quality assurance. Very quickly, as you probably know, both countries are very big countries. Both countries are federal in terms of their organization. In the terms of Brazil, you have about 2,500 higher education institutions, of which about 200 are universities in status, in other words, research institutions. And in Brazil, you have a strong private sector component. Of all these higher education institutions, the 2,500 of them, 85% are private institutions. However, among the universities, it's about equally distributed between private and public. And the public are divided within the federal institutions and the state institutions. In terms of the United States, you have, instead of 2,500, you have about 3,000 colleges, four-year colleges and universities. You have about 260 of these institutions being recognized as research institutions, formally recognized by the Carnegie Institute. And you have a predominance of public as opposed to private institutions. About 2/3 of the institutions and about 2/3 of these research universities are public in the United States and not private, even though many of those that you've heard about, like Harvard, Princeton, Yale, and so on, are private institutions. But overall, the public sector is predominant in the United States as opposed to Brazil. Now, I should mention too that this research is based a lot on personal experience. I've worked very much at the national level with higher education quality assurance in Brazil. And as I said, I studied at Stanford, conducting interviews with those involved in the processes. So this is basically a talk based on interviews and data that I myself was able to collect. But obviously the literature was reviewed in depth as well. Now, let's make some comparisons. As I said, both of the countries are federal countries, but they're very different in terms of their federal structures, in the sense that Brazil is a highly centralized federal system. The federal government has much more power than the state and local governments. And this is a tradition that goes back to the time when Brazil was under the control of an emperor. And so even though it's federal on paper, it's centralized. In the United States, it's the opposite. It's highly decentralized. As everybody knows, the states came together. The states maintained their rights when they first came together within the Constitution. And to this day, education in particular is highly decentralized. Whereas in Brazil, you've got federal universities run by the federal government. In the United States, you don't have any federal universities, but you do have state universities run by the state governments. And this difference in degree of centralization versus decentralization obviously is reflected in the quality assurance policies that each country adopts. In Brazil, you have a highly centralized system. You have a system that runs out of the federal government. It has a specific agency that's responsible for evaluating institutions and undergraduate programs, but you have another agency that's responsible for evaluating graduate programs. So it's centralized, but the responsibilities are divided between these two different agencies. And also I should mention in Brazil, they have two systems of higher education. You have what they call the federal system and the state system. And the federal system includes the private institutions. So the federal system is much bigger. 95% of the institutions belong to the federal system as opposed to the state system. And this national centralized quality assurance effort that I'm mentioning applies specifically to the federal system. In other words, it doesn't apply to all institutions, but it applies to the great majority of institutions. In the United States, you have a process that's highly decentralized. It grows up in the 19th century, grows up out of a highly fragmented circumstance in which institutions had little contact with one another. There was little uniformity in the 19th century. And so the institutions themselves banded together, recognizing that they had to guarantee certain standards in terms of their degrees, in terms of their organization, and also in terms of their quality. So they band together, they create regional organizations, regional agencies responsible for the evaluation, quality assurance within the institutions that belong to that agency, that regional agency. What does this mean? Well, whereas the system in Brazil is a federal system run by the federal government, the system in the United States is highly decentralized, and it's run by non-governmental organizations that organize, for the most part, on a regional basis. So most of the traditional universities are evaluated by these regionals, 6 regional organizations, 4 of which already existed by the beginning of the 20th century. In the case of the United States, also you have these organizations without a formal legal status in terms of defining whether or not an institution can function legally or not. In Brazil, one must be evaluated positively in order to be accredited officially, legally. In other words, you don't have legal legitimacy. You can't function legally in Brazil if you don't get a positive evaluation. That's not the case in the United States. They're non-governmental organizations. They're giving a stamp of approval. Who determines whether or not an institution functions or not are the state governments, and they have different ways of determining this. In many states, they make this determination like they make with regard to any business within the state. In other words, it's not specifically oriented toward higher education. In other states, they use the result of the accreditation process. But we must understand there's a big difference between an accreditation process that has legal implications for the survival of the institution, an accreditation process that is really kind of voluntary, but it represents a stamp of quality. And obviously it's important, especially in the United States with regard to receiving federal funds. You've got to not only be accredited in the United States by one of these recognized organizations, but the organization has to be recognized by the Department of Education in the United States. In other words, not every accrediting organization is recognized because some of them are kind of fly-by-night entities that are created really with that goal of giving an official stamp to everybody who joins and pays for that particular agency. I should mention that we have those 6 regional organizations in the United States, but we also have national organizations that respond to specific types of institutions. For instance, the for-profit institutions have national accrediting agencies that are for-profit institutions or career institutions, as they were referred to in the United States. You have national agencies that focus just on religious institutions. You have national agencies that refer just to online institutions. But these, I use the word national because they're applied nationally, but it doesn't mean they are part of the governmental process. In fact, many of these national agencies that apply to specific types of institutions are not even recognized by the Department of Education. And to be recognized by the Department of Education is important because it means federal funding, especially in the form of student loans. Now, in terms of funding, as I've just mentioned, the accreditation process has implications for all institutions in the United States because all institutions would like to get federal funds, and they can get federal funds, whether or not they're public or private, in the form of student loans. In Brazil, the financial implications only apply to the federal universities in terms of, and they only apply in a very small sense in terms of whether or not they get more or less money, but there's a whole matrix, a whole formula in which the evaluation result is just a small element of that formula. So in terms of financial implications, the financial implications are much broader in the United States because of the fact that there's this search for public funding by all institutions. In Brazil, you do get public funding also in the form of loans to private institutions as well, but this is a program that's much more limited than the program in the United States. In Brazil, the implications in terms of funding are probably smaller than the United States, but the implications in terms of legal status, in terms of being able to operate, much greater than in the United States. Now, there's a big difference in terms of the frequency of the evaluation process. In Brazil, everything works around a 3-year cycle, whereas in the United States, everything works around a 5 or 10-year cycle. So these evaluation processes are much more frequent in Brazil. But these evaluation processes that are more frequent in Brazil are based on not so much on the visits. The visits are less frequent. What they're doing is they're calculating indicators based on national data, and they use national data to accompany the minimum quality of both undergraduate programs and of institutions, universities and non-universities. Now, there's also a big difference in terms of student learning. As we know, the most important element within a higher education institution is the question of student learning. And though everybody recognizes that, these external evaluations often don't take into account adequately what's going on in terms of the learning process. They look at more objective criteria that can be easily measured. Well, both countries deal with the question of student learning differently. In the United States, there's a big emphasis on self-evaluation within the institution, and it's expected that the institution will have ways of evaluating student learning, and that this self-evaluation is an important ingredient in terms of the external evaluation that's taken on by these agencies that I just mentioned. So really the problem of a company, of measuring, of promoting student learning has to do with the institution and their self-evaluation process. And the self-evaluation process is an object of external evaluation. Now in Brazil, there's a national test, and it's probably the only country, with the exception of Colombia, that has a national test that's required of all completing students. All areas of learning are covered over a 3-year period, and every student must take this test when they finish their studies, if their area falls within one of those 3 years that the test is applied in. It's applied every 3 years to all areas. So the test results are very important. And I mentioned the indicators before that are used to accompany every 3 years the programs and the institutions. Well, one of the ingredients of these indicators, a key indicator, is the success of the students on this national test. And the test includes both general information and specific information related to that particular profession. In other words, there are like 70 different tests because there's 70 different professions that are being tested. And the results are not results for the student. In other words, the student results are not divulged. The student gets his or her own results, but the results are not communicated to anybody else. What the interest is how the group of students do in that particular program. In other words, are the students as a whole in that program doing well, or are they not doing well comparatively to other students in other programs of the same nature? And there are certain indicators that calculate value added. In other words, to what degree does the institution contribute to the test results? And this value added is made possible because there's a prior test that students take when they come into the higher education institution, and the results from the prior test are compared to the test that comes at the end of the undergraduate study period. So this is a unique aspect of Brazil, is the emphasis on a national test. And as I said, it's obligatory, required, it's part of the official curriculum. A student that does not take this test does not graduate. Finally, there's a difference in terms of the decision-making process, just because in Brazil, they don't use the yes/no result like they do in the United States and like they do in most countries. They use a hierarchy. They use a ranking system from 1 to 5, and all, in other words, institutions are all ranked, and this is rather difficult. It creates problems, especially when you're basing the ranking on visits, because the people that are visiting often don't have an overall comparative perspective in terms of how an institution compares with other institutions. And so this has been one of the reasons why there's been a certain migration to the use of indicators, because the visits tended to be very positive, which is typical, normal. Visitors are nicely received, they're welcomed with open arms, and they tend to see what they're visiting in a positive light. But this emphasis on ranking creates another big difference between Brazil and the United States, and that is the degree of formality of the process. When people talk about Brazil, I don't know if you know about Brazil, but it's famous as an informal kind of place. The United States is more famous as an objective, scientific type of place, right? Well, in terms of the higher education evaluation process, Brazil is much more rigorous, much more formal, much more objective than the United States. The United States is more fluid, it's more open, it's more flexible, and there's much greater interaction between the evaluators and the institution being evaluated in the United States than in Brazil. Everything is kept at a distance, the greatest distance possible. The people that are selected to take part in a visiting commission are selected by the computer. They have to be distant from the institution. They themselves don't know one another because they're selected by a computer to go to this particular institution. In Brazil and in the United States, it's much less formal. Okay, 2 minutes. In the United States, it's much less formal, and you have a situation where the actual institution often participates in the selection of the commission that will be doing the visit. And since they're regional organizations, most of the visits are made by people from that particular region, which is quite different from the situation in Brazil. Also, there's much more interaction in terms of, there's a longer period, there's much more interaction between the commission and the institution, not just during the visit, but before and after the visit. In the United States, the interaction is much greater than it is in the United States and in Brazil. Now, concluding, I have like 1 minute and 30 seconds. Well, I have a list of 9 different recommendations in part of my paper based on this comparative analysis. I will not try to cover these 9, but just to emphasize a couple of them. One of the most important is the need to emphasize institutional self-evaluation, done much more so in the United States than is done in Brazil. A second thing is the need to upgrade the standards in both countries. Both countries, the quality assurance effort is criticized, widely criticized, by not having high enough standards. In other words, it's too easy to get approval in both countries. They have this problem for different reasons, but it's a problem in both countries. And finally, it's obvious that there should be more of an effort in terms of quality assurance efforts, national quality assurance efforts, to utilize indicators and utilize data that permit more effective international comparisons. Thank you very much.
Thanks to you, Robert. While you were talking, it was like non-stop thinking about quality in our country too. I mean, here in Russia. There's, as you were saying, it's definitely, it's also a federation. It's big. I don't know. Maybe it should be the third country that you can take in account. Are there any questions to Robert? No, maybe we keep on thinking and we do the questions afterwards. So Jake Merdock of the University of Burgundie, France. The study, the title of the study of Jake is The Quality of Higher Education Studies and the Labor Market in 9 European Countries. Jake, you have the mic.
Thank you very much. So I will try to share my slide, if I can find it on my computer. And you can see the slides?
Yes, now yes.
Yes, okay, right. So I'm a professor of comparative education.
Jake, sorry, can you put the whole screen?
Whole screen, okay.
Yes.
I'm
Down. Okay.
Okay. So I'm professor of comparative education at the University of Dijon. As my voice betrays me, I'm a British citizen as well. And I studied and I've worked in various European countries and also in North America. And presently I'm actually in Moscow. So I will be face-to-face with the conference tomorrow. And so if Russian colleagues would like to discuss also the Russian context with me on higher education, I would be very interested to learn more about the system here. So my talk is linked to the session 1 this morning, looking at the quality of higher education, both in terms of internal quality of the higher education system and also the external dimension in terms of the situation of graduates on the labor market. This study looks at the perceptions of students and their experiences during their study on one hand, and their transition to the labor market. Most research on higher education, and particularly looking at study and career paths, have looked separately on questions of access to higher education, student success, dropout, and then on the other hand, looking at the situation on the labor market. So this is an attempt to link the two, such as work of Triventi. So on the one hand, we will look at the experiences, the study and living conditions of students, particularly in terms of their social demographic backgrounds, and particularly also on how the students will use their skills that they acquire on the labor market. So we have two sources of data. The first is an international database, which has been developed since the beginning of 2000. Every 3 years, Eurostudent collects data on student study and living conditions in up to 30 countries, including Russia. And it provides detailed information, a very vast database on all aspects of higher education studies. And we will compare this data with two existing international surveys, which were carried out around 2000. The first is the Cheers project, which was carried out in over 10 countries and also Japan, and also its younger brother, which was the Reflex project, which was a follow-up study of the same type. And these studies are very interesting in the fact that they ask the students to rate their skills that they feel they possess on graduation and to what extent they feel they are acquired in their present job. So we selected 9 common countries to the survey. So we have Austria, the Czech Republic, Finland, France, Germany, Italy, Netherlands, Norway, and Sweden. So we have a mixture of Central European countries, Northern European countries, and some Mediterranean countries. So I present some data, descriptive data. So in red are the more traditional profiles of students. And we see that in Mediterranean countries, such as France and Italy, but also interestingly on the far right, in terms of the Russian context, the students are younger, whereas traditionally in blue, the students are older in Scandinavian countries, such as Norway, Sweden, and Finland. This is because the students in the latter country acquire previous experience. Like after their secondary school studies, they don't enter directly higher education. They find jobs, they find activities, and then they start studies, generally maybe 4 years older. So actually this population in Nordic countries are generally older. They also, as you see, have already left home, contrary to Italian students, who a vast majority are still living with their parents. And this is confirmed by many studies in Italy of the fact that Italian, particularly men, stay a long time with their parents. We also find a certain degree of autonomy in Austria, where the students are less likely to be living with their parents. And particularly if once they have left their parents, they are less also financially dependent on their parents. So they were living with partners, they have children. So there is also a necessity to be working much more during their studies, not just for professional experience, but also for paying everyday costs. Also interesting, we have from a North American context, a concept called first generation students. They are the ones who are the first of their family to study in higher education. And we see that in Italy, Norway, and Austria, actually we have a majority of students who are the first of their family to study in higher education, whereas in Russia, Finland, and Germany, there is some degree of also social reproduction, that it's the children of those who have already studied in higher education who are accessing higher education. As I was reading an article, the acorn sits close to the oak. If we look also in terms of measuring quality of higher education, we have in the study various elements, and I've pointed out a few. The first is in terms also of international dimensions. And we see that almost about a third of Scandinavian students have had some international mobility. The same for also in Austria and Czech Republic. And for the Russian context, very few students have already had some studies. Concerning how the students felt about the studies, what I wanted to point out is actually the Austrian students are very critical of the quality of their the education they received. They are a minority are satisfied with the study, whereas in other countries here they are more or less two-thirds, at least two-thirds are satisfied. Also, it's linking to the labor market. There were questions of how they felt about their future employment prospects, and in particularly Northern European countries and also the Netherlands, about two-thirds and up to three-quarters felt positive about their future employment prospects. So if we actually look at the concrete objective employment prospects, we have also this certain distinction between Northern and Southern European countries. This is not necessarily new for those who study transition to labor markets in various European countries, that the rate of employment is higher in Mediterranean countries, particularly in Italy and France, whereas it's much more lower in Nordic countries. Also, a particularity of Southern European countries, there are more short-term contracts. So the graduates are hopping from job to job, whereas in other countries, particularly the Czech Republic, there is less short-term contracts and also less part-time work. This also has a link to how the students feel about their job, their situation. And in Norway, almost 80% of the students are satisfied by their job, where it is around 50% for Italian students. A particularity of Nordic countries is also that there is a large degree of employment in the public sector. And going back to Italy, we have also the situation where the graduates are working in the level below higher education, but in terms of what we would call over-education. There is a high degree of graduates occupying jobs which traditionally would not require a higher education qualification. If we asked the students at the end of the questionnaire, if they had to start again, would they make the same choices with like some hindsight? And we see generally across all the countries, at least two-thirds of the students, depending on the survey, would agree to study the same course as they did initially. So moving on to the question of skills, one of the measures in this study was asking the students to what degree did they use their skills. And we see that about almost 80%, the higher countries, the Nordic countries, Norway, Sweden, and Finland, use most their skills. And there are varying amounts. And actually, according to the survey, it seems that within the more recent reflex study, there is more skill use by the graduates than in cheers. This can be differences due to the types of questions asked and also the economic context. Whether it was, what were the employment difficulties, particularly at the time of the survey. Also looking at skills, we can look at what we call skill mismatches. There were 8 common skills across the 2 surveys. And here I show the ones where there seems less deficits between the level that the students declared that they had on graduation and the level that was required on their job. And I took it on a Likert scale, like two levels differences. And we see that, for example, communication skills such as language skills, writing skills are one of the elements where there doesn't seem a particular shortage in terms of skills that the graduates possess. Also, analytical skills seem also to be more frequently possessed, and also working in a team. So these both communication and also transferable skills seem to be developed by the different educational systems, but there are certain nuances that can be said between the countries, which I can answer within the questions. However, there seems to be more of a gap, or more of a larger shortage in terms of managing skills, such as planning, being able to negotiate, working under pressure, and also we see a large increase also in computing skills. So the more recent cohort are more competent in terms of their computing skills that they possess. So there is a certain difference between certain skills which are taught as part of particular programs, such as I mentioned, communication skills, also analytical skills, which can be also linked to certain types of coursework, and also getting students to work in teams. But also there are maybe some other skills which the higher education program maybe could develop more. So as some sort of summary and some conclusion, there is an ongoing research funded by the European Commission. The European Commission did fund the Reflex and the Cheers survey many years ago. I was part of this study 20 years ago. And but there is a new development with Eurostudent to do a graduate survey. And there was a pilot study which was funded by the European Commission, and the survey was recently carried out in 8 countries. And we have 4 actually that are covered in this presentation today, which is Austria, Czech Republic, Germany, and Norway, but also it was carried out also in Croatia, Greece, Lithuania, and Malta. And it looked particularly also the questions of employment, how skills were used, and but also there was a increasing looking at other outcomes of higher education. I am also part of a comparative study with colleagues from the Russian Academy of Science, who we are looking at perceptions of young people. This is another study, but there is actually the question of how young people see themselves. And this study, Eurograduate, and also the study I mentioned with the Polish and Italian and Russian colleagues, this development of looking at other outcomes, not just in terms of employment, but also how people see themselves about their lives. And also within the growing context, despite the pandemic, we are still wanting to develop international mobility and cooperation, and hopefully with the future will be more positive, and both students within, for example, the Erasmus Plus program, which will continue to develop, and it is interesting to see how the international dimension develops over the next years. So I will be very happy to have any questions from the audience.
Jake, thank you very much. Super interesting. Good to have you here in Russia. Hope we meet tomorrow. I would like to open the floor if there are questions. Cynthia has a comment.
I wrote a question.
Robert,
in the chat
is it you, Robert? You wanted to ask something?
Yes, and also I noticed that Jake had a question here. I don't know if
No, that was before. That was
That was before. Yes.
you already asked that question, Jake. Okay, well, Jake, thank you very much. Just a quick question. I'm curious as to what different types of institutions, how this impacts on your results, because I imagine that different types of institutions attract different types of students, and so their career expectations and career trajectories must vary by institutions. So I'm curious whether or not you found a difference, especially between public and private institutions. And I don't know if this is relevant to the countries that you studied, but I'm very interested here in Brazil and also in the United States with the question of for-profit versus non-profit institutions. I don't know if any of your institutions were for-profit, but if they're for-profit, they might be very different in terms of the clientele that they attract. Thank you.
okay. In terms of the data, there is a distinction in Eurostudent between universities and vocational higher education institutes, and also in the cheers and the reflex. And it actually seems that the employment is better for these students because they are more vocationally orientated. But there is also, and it links to your second question, there is the element of prestige or reputation, which does have an effect. Like there's some halo effect. I'm sorry, I probably look like a Russian icon with my lamp, but it's also this, on one hand, you can have good trajectories for students from vocational institutions, like, for example, community colleges in the United States. But for example, executive positions, responsibility, there seems also elements of prestige that intervene. I was actually going to ask you a question about Brazilian higher education. My PhD supervisor used to work in Brazil and did study between the private and public universities. And I understood that the reputation of the public is better than the private in terms of higher education, but it's the opposite way around in terms of secondary school. And to what extent, maybe we can discuss about this, to what extent does the private sector in higher education play the democratic role? You know, if the student isn't accepted in a public university in Brazil, does he have the option to go to a private one? So actually, I'm answering your question with my own question.
Yes, well, great, thank you. Questions are the best part of these encounters. Your question is a very good one. It's a very appropriate one. If I'm not mistaken, Mагдалена, in Chile, the best institutions are private institutions, or at least the very best is considered a private institution in Chile. But you're right, in terms of Brazil, in general, the public universities in general have a better reputation. They are research institutions. They get money specifically for doing research. Professors have less time in the classroom because they have more time to do research. So there are a series of advantages for working at a public institution as opposed to a private institutions. And the advantages basically have to do with the issue of research and also the question of selection of professors. There are many more doctoral people with a doctorate degree at public institutions, in part because you need a doctorate degree really to be qualified to do in-depth research. But just to qualify a bit the answer, there are high quality private institutions, especially those that are related to the Catholic Church. There are, I think, 12 pontificate universities that are related directly to the Catholic Church through the Pope, supposedly, and they tend to emphasize research, and they tend to be of high quality among those institutions that are considered high quality research institutions. But the great majority, first of all, the great majority of higher education institutions are not universities. They're colleges. And the great majority of these colleges have no research obligations, and they have very few people that have a doctorate degree working. The professors are usually paid by the hour of teaching as opposed to a regular salary, and they tend to be of rather questionable quality. On the other hand, you're right, in the sense they have greatly opened up the opportunity to study on the higher education level because the research universities are very expensive. And so the number of research universities that you have is limited due to the financial circumstances. And so the gap has been filled largely by private institutions. And Brazil does have a program of giving loans to students at private institutions. And this has helped make private institutions more viable. And it has made it available to students who otherwise wouldn't have the means to go to higher education. So the private sector serves an important purpose, but you're absolutely right. The high quality research universities tend to be the public institutions.
Thank you very much for both of you. Cynthia has a comment.
Yes, thank you. I would like to thank also both speakers, the previous speakers, for their interesting presentation. I wanted to add a comment on the last one, and I wanted to connect also to what was said before for the interpretation of the Italian data, because in fact, the structure of higher education institutions in Italy is composed by universities, but we do not have University of Applied Sciences. This is a kind of higher education offer that is lacking at the Italian level. That is why you have seen that also the skills of students is higher compared to what is required by those that are looking for students. And also another factor is that there is the structure of firms or the structure of the economic activity that is composed by small firms, and not the big firms are not so does not compose the biggest portion. So there are a lot of small firms, and of course here also the role of the specialized and technical skills that are requested is important. And also a third factor could be that the PhD in these small firms does not have a role, and so there is more need for more technical higher education instead of university education. So these were just some comments for the results for the Italian case. And I had also a question about the data. You presented the results in terms of aggregate data for Italy. Do you have this information at the level of institutions? So the details answered by institutions, or they are aggregated national level? Thank you.
Thank you for your comments on the context. Yes, I have some knowledge through my Italian context of colleagues, how it's very important, the types of employers, types of activity. And also, one particularity of Italian higher education system is that it's principally, practically all universities. So it's not necessarily comparable to systems which are binary. We have the database is an individual database. We have information on field of study, the institution they went to, many schooling related characteristics, and we have done many studies. This is what I was descriptive today, but I can do much more complicated, multivariate and specific data looking at different types of study program, types of institutions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Joanna had a question. Joanna?
Yes, can you hear me? Sorry, because I changed my microphone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so in fact, I have a question also to both of you. So one question is to Robert. In fact, it's fascinating for me because I have never, I have no knowledge about the South American systems of higher education institutions. So if I write you the email, can you give me some references considering, because I think that it would be wonderful to increase, the different analysis also about the quality of the services and productivity analysis and so on, efficiency analysis, to take into account, for example, we have here Europe, US, then China is very important, okay? So of course, but Brazil, you know, with the number of people, it could be just a perfect match for us, I think, you know. So can
And of course, Russia, we are in a
yeah,
Russian
Russia,
country.
yes, of course, in
Country.
Russia, of course.
Yeah.
So we welcome all, you know, so it will be, it's a pity that we don't meet personally, because then it could be, you know, quicker, I would say, and maybe possible cooperation. So just a question to Robert, can I drop you an email asking some references, further references, considering South America and Brazil, in fact?
Of course, I'll have to give you my address because I assume you probably don't have it. It's R. Verheyen, R-V-E-R-H-I-N-E.
But probably I will find you based on the title of the presentation and on the program. Yes.
Okay.
I will Google you. Don't worry. I will Google you.
Okay, I was unable to open up the program, so that's why I didn't know if you had my address or not. Just one quick point. The best article I'm going to send you is one I wrote for the Higher Education Institute in Moscow. They produced a huge book comparing countries with regard to the federal system and the impact of the federal system on higher education. And I have a chapter in that book, which is, I think, a pretty good chapter in English, dealing with Brazilian education. So I'll send that on to you as well as something else. Thank you very much for the request.
And second, maybe quick question to Jake, because you also, okay, I'm not going to say about the Polish higher education institutions and data about, because it's the endless story about data on the Polish higher education institutions. But Jake, in fact, I have the question to you to this, because as far as I understood, but maybe I misunderstood, you said at the end of this pilot study, yes, considering the students, yes, this was in 2019 run or something, I don't remember. And my question is connected with your question that you had to my presentation, that did you take into account the different attitudes in different countries? You know, I'm teaching economic growth, completely different story. But if we have the correlation between happiness and the economic growth, you know, it seems that the most happiest people are from Colombia and not from Qatar, the wealthiest now. So did you take into account, you know, that in these questionnaires, yes, because I understand that it was based on the questionnaire, this pilot study. Did you also take into account, you know, the different answer, you know, considering, you know, in some countries, students maybe, you know, maybe they simply have different attitudes to the higher education because of some, you know, background and cultural background. That's my question.
Thank you very much for that. But yes, in these surveys, there is questions on the values of the students, and I didn't present it today, but it also links to what I said in conclusion about the ongoing research I'm doing with Italian, Russian, and Polish colleagues, where we particularly focus on the values of students. And we see there are, like Russia and Poland, share the same necessary types of values. And also we are looking particularly in the context also of the pandemic and what is important for people. And so if you're interested, we can discuss, I can send you this a presentation of I've done elsewhere. We're looking at values of youths and particular dimensions of their life, and it's, you know, it's like the European value survey, like what is important for people, and also it's interesting, I think, on this to take into account also the pandemic effect, how this affects people's lives, and will there be some scarring effect of people, like happiness may be relative, like what we took for granted before. I think now is our main mindset has changed a lot.
Jake, so it's very interesting. Okay, and from whom you are cooperated in Poland?
It's the from Warsaw. It's the ICOP, I think, in Warsaw. Like there's a Institute for Social Psychology, and ECOP, a labor market. Is the partner, and I was recently in Krakow, in Carpats, in the European Economic Forum, presenting this. So
in Carpats, you have been in Carpats.
In Carpats, yes, in the Economic Forum.
But you didn't know that it's very political meeting.
Yes, I know very well. Yes,
that you know that rectors, they strike the meeting.
Yes, I know. I know. We saw. Yes, it was.
No, you didn't saw them because that's why they. Okay, never mind. Some small talk, but you know, you can be sure about the Polish attitude. General Russian, I think that have different, completely different. In Poland, we just love complaining all the time. So you can take it for granted that we complain for everything. You know.
Yes, French too. Okay, thank you very much. So if you're also, if you Google me, we can exchange. I would be very interested to learn more about the Polish context and also about what you said about the forum.
So in this session, we have some of friends here are just listeners. Do you have any questions? The ones that are here, like participating. I don't think they have more questions. So we have 3 more minutes. Maybe I'm just going to thank you all for being here. I mean, I've learned a lot from all of you, and that's fantastic. Hopefully we can be in contact. I would be happy to receive you all in St. Petersburg. And I thank you for being here, though we cannot be, I mean, to have a coffee together, but hopefully we can do virtual coffees with Joanna, Cynthia, Bob. Jake, hope to see you tomorrow here.
Yes, we can have coffee tomorrow. Zavtra.
Definitely,
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah. Thank you to all of you very much. I'm sure we can find the emails to send you to all of you, so we can be in touch. So thank you again very much for being here, and have a great afternoon and a great morning, Robert.
I just want to thank you, organizers.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes, thank you for the coordination of the session.
Thank you very much. And Magdalena, see you maybe next year.
Definitely see you all. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
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 Bye. Bye.